BBC Sounds. Music, radio, podcasts.
Hello, I'm Kaz Graham and this is the Farming Today podcast. Coming up, taking control of supply chains. We hear how Scottish farmers reckon collaboration and farmer co-ops keep them one step ahead. And slow broadband and ropey mobile services, the challenge of getting rural Britain online and connected.
I represent an area in South Wales in the valleys. It's difficult geography. One of the things I'm trying to focus things on a bit more is instead of just putting masts on the top of mountains, why don't we just make sure that we track where people actually live and work?
And we've more on the government Digital Inclusion Action Plan a little later. But first, how about bringing the wolf back to Britain? At midday today on Radio 4, Rare Earth will be looking at the extraordinary rise of the wolf across Western Europe, from virtual extinction to a presence in every country of the European mainland. Should we let them cross the channel? Well, Rare Earth has been to the Carpathian Mountains of Romania to see how farmers there live alongside the wolf.
Farkasokkal az a baj, hogy nagyon ravasz állatok, ők nagyon oda tudnak lopózkodni.
The trouble with wolves is that they're very clever animals, very good at stealing animals. So compared to a bear, which comes through the forest and crunches branches underfoot, that gives a warning to the dogs. But the wolf's more stealthy. That's why you need a really good dog, which picks up on the scent of the wolf. If a bear gets into the enclosure, he might take one ewe. But if a wolf gets in there, he might kill 100. So we're much more afraid of the wolves than of the bears.
That was farmer Josef Rasch, and we have more wolves at midday today in Rare Earth on BBC Radio 4. Now, Egg is one of the small isles, part of the Inner Hebrides. It's just 5 miles by 3, and farming there has its challenges, not least the weather and, well, being an island. Making an income from rearing livestock there is difficult, and Sarah Bowden, who runs a 2,500-acre farm owned by the Isle of Egg Heritage Trust, does have sheep and cattle, but relies on a number of biodiversity schemes for income. She's planning some major changes on the farm, and she's immensely proud of the environmentally friendly initiatives that she's already introduced, as she told our reporter Kathleen Carricker.
So, Sarah, we've just driven round part of your farm, part of this 2,500 acres. So how do you manage it now? You said that quite a lot of the land is moorland and bog.
A lot of the farm is in agri-environment schemes, so we have to manage it quite carefully. We have species-rich grassland, moorland, habitat mosaic, corncrake fields. Basically, this in-by ground is no stock in it from April until August to allow the wildflowers to set and seed, and it's been really fantastic to see a huge increase in the butterfly and insect life in Bay. We're actually the furthest northern point of where the marsh fritillary butterfly is found, which is quite a rare one.
Yeah, that's quite an accolade.
Yeah, it feeds on devil's bit scabious, which is this really beautiful little purple flower head, and it needs a good carpet of it for the caterpillars to get enough feed. So yeah, we're really lucky to have that. Being part of the scheme, it's a competitive process to get accepted, and because I'd say the cost of producing lambs and calves is basically, there's no profit in it. And so without being able to be part of these schemes, the farm wouldn't be able to exist, because we don't make enough money off of our cattle and lamb sales.
This would have traditionally been a sheep farm though, wouldn't it?
Well, it's been a sheep farm since 1853, when the people that lived down in a place called Grulin were cleared off and went to Nova Scotia. And it is difficult ground, and the first farmer that came here only lasted 4 years before he left. But because that ground had been cultivated down there with oats, and it was deeply fertilised with seaweed in the first year, the sheep did so well that they all had twins, which is quite rare up here. In southern farms you get lots of twins and triplets, but here what we want is a good solid single, because quite often twins get predated on the hill by ravens and sea eagles and golden eagles and things.
So is that a farming myth, an egg?
Yeah, there's also an amazing one about a woman who started a flock of sheep with a black lamb that a seagull flew from rum with it in its talons and couldn't hold it and dropped it down there, and she found it and nursed it to health and started a flock of sheep from it.
And had a happy life, an egg.
And you can hear more from Sarah on the Isle of Egg in this Sunday morning's On Your Farm here on Radio 4 at 6:35. All this week, we are looking at the food supply chain. What happens to farm produce on its journey from farm to fork? There can be many stages along the way, and of course, everyone needs their cut. But farmers have long argued that they deserve a bigger slice of the cake. SAOS, the umbrella organisation for all of Scotland's farm cooperatives, says that forming co-ops is one way of achieving that. Nancy Nicholson has been to their annual conference, where she started by speaking to Jed Futter, a retail consultant who helps farmers and retailers work together.
What we are seeing, and what I'm certainly seeing, there's change on both sides. So the retailers are starting to understand availability is the most important thing. And the agriculture sector is starting to understand we're in charge of availability. So if we turn it off, the retailers have nothing. And we saw that with eggs. So every sector is different. They don't have their own challenges, but they are getting more confident at saying no to some of the supermarkets.
Should they do it more?
They need to do whatever is right for their business on each individual day. So the retailers will always think about the short term. If you've got shareholders, those shareholders want to know at a half year and a full year what your profitability is, and they won't accept profitability going backwards. If you've got private equity, that debt needs to be paid. But that's their problem, not yours. What you have to focus on is actually, well, what am I in control of? I'm in control of who I sell to and whether I want to continue working with them or not.
Well, the conference theme was inevitably cooperation, and the movement's chair, Rory Christie, offered insights into his co-op's approach.
I chair a small cooperative supplying a global cheesemaker, and we have to work very hard to make sure that relationship is good, that we deliver what our customer wants and to deliver what's in the best interest of our members. And balancing those two things are difficult.
How are you doing it?
We came together as a group of farmers and realised that we needed to be more professional, that we needed to pool our resources to have the best market intelligence, to be as good in negotiators as the people at the other side of the table. There's always differences, and farmers love to fight among themselves. Put that aside and collaborate regardless of your differences, because that is the only way to get ahead. Don't be last man standing. Oh, I'll just tough it out. My neighbour will go bust and there'll be more space for me. Doesn't work like that.
Other cooperatives like Scottish pig producers have grasped opportunities to forge connections with buyers, including the new owners of their processing plant at Brechin. Managing Director Andy McGowan.
We've believed for many years that supply chain collaboration it's on us to make that happen. We can't expect retailers to do it off their own back. They're not going to complicate their lives by trying to integrate the supply chain, and that's where cooperatives come into their own, because we can coordinate that. We can do it efficiently rather than individual farmers trying to do it themselves. We've been really excited by what Brown's Food Group have done since they took on the Avatar at Brechin, and they see Scottishness as being their unique selling point, which is fantastic for us as Scottish farmers. So it really has been about helping them with the branding, helping them with some of the secondary messaging, the sustainability things we can do, just the attributes of being professional family farmers who are very good at what they do. And that's a selling point for Brown's then into the different supply chains they're trying to do. Other sectors, the bigger, less integrated ones, trickier to do because you've got an awful lot of players.
Andy McGowan from Scottish Pig Producers. Now, if you live in the countryside, it may not come as much of a surprise that broadband speeds in rural areas are 26% slower than they are in urban areas. That's according to the government. And that there are still parts of the country that have no mobile phone access whatsoever. These are just two of the areas that the government aims to tackle in its new Digital Inclusion Action Plan. They've recently published what they call the first steps. They're also looking to improve the digital skills of the 7.3 million people, that is 18% of the population, who they say lack the minimum essential digital skills for work. I asked Chris Bryant, the Minister with responsibility for digital inclusion, how they're going to deliver those skills to rural Britain.
One of the things that we're doing is we're setting up an innovation fund so that local authorities in different parts of the country, and my guess is that quite a few rural areas are going to take us up on this, can come to us and say, look, the single most important thing we could do to tackle digital exclusion in this particular area is, you know, run projects around skills for older people, or it might be people who work in particular industries.
Yeah, well, we would say, I guess, that giving people these essential skills for working digitally is, of course, really valuable, but it's not much use for those farmers and workers in remote rural areas where reliable internet connection just still isn't a given.
Aha. Which is why, of course, first of all, we've got Project Gigabit, which is rolling out decent broadband, by which I mean gigabit-capable broadband. And I know the vast majority of people in the country haven't the faintest idea what the difference is between 2 megabits per second and 1,000 megabits per second. But it is basically the difference between the Wheel of Doom, that circling thing going round and round, which means you can't get anything done, being there on your screen or not. So we're rolling out gigabit-capable broadband to everywhere across the country. 99% of properties is what we're aiming for by 2030. £2 billion worth of money we've invested in that. But we also need to make sure that there's a proper mobile signal.
Yeah, I mean, people living in rural areas have broadband speeds that are 26% slower than in urban areas. And there are still places that can't receive any mobile reception. I mean, that's in the text of your action plan. How are you going to turn that around? Because it's proved really difficult for previous governments. What are you going to do differently?
So, first of all, we've got a significant amount of extra investment coming from the private sector for mobile masts. Secondly, I think we need to change the law to make it easier for people to roll out masts. That sometimes it's about planning decisions, which take far too long and make it difficult in rural areas. But I'm very conscious. I represent an area in South Wales in the valleys, the Rhondda and Ogmore, which is essentially 4 valleys. And I know precisely these problems. It's difficult geography. One of the things I'm trying to focus things on a bit more is, instead of just putting masts on the top of mountains, why don't we just make sure that we track where people actually live and work?
How do you get around the lack of reliability? Because I think that's the thing that causes people in rural areas real problems. We hear from farmers who, you know, they lose their broadband connection halfway through a form that they need to fill in for DEFRA, for example. It goes, they lose everything. We hear from farmers who've diversified. It can take them ages to pick up a signal to take a cash-free payment, say at a farmer's market, all kinds of things like that.
Or upload a photograph of the new yurts that they've put in the field or whatever it may be, so that they've got a decent tourism offer as well. No, I fully understand all of these issues. That's why, as I say, we're determined to make sure that there's better connectivity. We're aiming to get to 5G standalone, which will be much more reliable than that what we have at the moment. But I've also been saying to Ofcom, I'm sure this is something that your listeners will have heard many, many times, or will have said to you. They'll have said, well, theoretically, it says that we've got 99% mobile coverage from all 4 mobile operators, but I can't get a signal and I'm waving my phone around all over the place. I've leant out the bathroom window and I still can't get a signal. And that is because I think Ofcom's reporting has not been as reliable as people would like. That's one of the things I'm determined to change.
That's Chris Bryant, the Minister for Digital Inclusion. And that's all we've time for today. I'm Kaz Graham. The producer is Heather Simons, and Farming Today is a BBC Audio Bristol production.